And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. Hope everybody is having a good week. I'm joined today by 24/7 Sports national college basketball writer Isaac Trotter. We're going to be talking a bunch of Auburn hoops and SEC hoops and college basketball at large on the show today. So if you're an Auburn basketball listener on this show, you will enjoy this one. First of all, I just wanted to introduce Isaac to everybody. Somebody who does a great job covering national college basketball on our network. If you guys don't follow him on Twitter, at Isaac, I believe that's 2 underscores, right? If I'm seeing that correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Someone stole my 1 underscore. So
oh my goodness, so you'll have to pay Elon to get it back, or go with none. You might send a big offer and go with no underscores. But yeah, guys, be sure to follow him on Twitter. I say that because every time Isaac posts a story, I feel like I learn a little bit more about college basketball. And you kind of tell me, Isaac, about how this has been for you doing this on our network, because I feel like college basketball may be a little bit different than college football because A, there's so many teams, and B, there's so many games, at least for me personally. And I feel like Auburn fans, when they're, just keeping up with Auburn, it's so hard to get a pulse on what's happening everywhere, even all around the SEC, because there's so many teams. I guess, how do you kind of attack that? How do you try to keep track of 300 plus teams and what they're doing?
Yeah, it's completely wild. I don't think there's a method to the madness, to be honest, but it's one of those situations where I'm on Synergy every morning, like watching replays of games. You can kind of get through them in like an hour, which I really like. But it's awesome, right? Like the league in the SEC has been great. I think the top of the league is as good as it's been in a while. And then you have the Big 12 is really good. The Big 10 has some decent teams. It feels like, especially with the portal, the interest in college basketball, I think, is at an all-time high, just because you can get better so quickly in the portal and you're more interested in what these rosters look like. And then the season comes around, it's like, hey, how do all these new pieces look and everything? So for me, it's just so fun to dive into different teams every single night. I feel like I have 2 or 3 games on at a time, and then I have like 6 live stats going, and then just watching replays all the time. It's basketball 24/7 for me, but that's the way I like it. So it's a grind, but it's super, super fun.
Yeah, for college hoops, I feel like in Auburn, people have gotten more into it over the last few years, of course, because the program has gotten so much better under Bruce Pearl. But if you are that, there's such thing as a college football junkie, definitely. But college basketball, I feel like, is a little bit different of a beast because of, like you said, like you can get so deep into the advanced stats and following so many games and players at the same time. I feel like there's so many, different aspects going on all at once. But I say that to say this has been a really fun season already, and we do this to ourselves every year, and then it gets to March and somehow it exceeds our expectations. And speaking of exceeding expectations, we talked about it before we got rolling. This Auburn team, we're going to talk about their win on Wednesday night against Alabama, 99-81, back on their home floor. Of course, they get payback. It was 2 weeks ago to the day that they fell in Tuscaloosa. Had an opportunity to send that game to overtime. Of course, they missed a free throw there at the end. Auburn felt like it went to Tuscaloosa and didn't play that well, but still had an opportunity to win the game. Of course, they come back home. They've been playing a lot better over the last maybe 3 or 4 games. And so the big story with this one, though, Isaac, I know you were watching this game. Janai Broome and Jalen Williams combined for more than half of Auburn's scoring. This was a foul fest. The second half was, Auburn fans had a lot of time to enjoy the win, but maybe for the wrong reasons. I mean, it was kind of groan-inducing down the stretch. But look, Bruce Pearl said after the game, he said, guys were climbing all, we were too handsy with Alabama's guards, and Alabama was climbing all over Broome and Williams try to stop him. So, you can say what you want about the officiating, but I mean, there were legitimate fouls a lot of the time. I say all that to say, I think Auburn has a legitimate identity now, with Janai Broome, with Jalen Williams, and them being maybe the best front line in the league, if not one of the best front lines in the league. I guess, what were your takeaways and impressions from watching Auburn in this game, where it felt like they kind of just crock-potted them? They went up by 15 or whatever at halftime, and then just kind of were able to keep them at bay for the rest of the game.
Yeah, I just love the synergy and the connectiveness between both Jalen and Janai right now. Like, they just feel like they're really connected together. They're both moving in sync. They understand kind of where each other guy's going to be. The lob from the free throw line for the dunk from Broome to Williams was pretty sick. And you start to see this group start to come together. And the other thing, too, is I felt like they executed their game plan really, really well. Like, Alabama has struggled all year long at protecting the rim. They give up a ton of shots in the paint. And Auburn didn't get like too shot happy from three. I thought sometimes their shot selection against Alabama in the first matchup was left a little bit to be desired. This game is like, hey, we're just going to go right to the rim, and you can't stop us. You really physically cannot stop us. And just that ability to overwhelm teams is something that, like, it's very different. And then on the other end too, like, I just feel like you feel Auburn so much. Like, obviously the trying to turn you over, and you're going to get a lot of deflections and stuff like that, but they just turn teams' water off at the rim. Like, Auburn now is up to second nationally in rim defense. Like, that's absurd. Teams are shooting just 48% at the rim against this team. And that last night, Alabama missed 17 layups and missed a dunk. So that's 18 missed shots at the rim. Like, that is just violent confrontations that Auburn keeps winning on both ends of the floor. That stuff plays. Like, that stuff really plays. That's why if you're an Auburn fan, you feel like this style of basketball can kind of beat up on pretty much anybody.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the one thing that they were. I mean, I know they lost those 2 straight games on the road to Bama and Mississippi State, but your defense traveled in those games. And so if you're Auburn, you're looking ahead to Florida this weekend. You've got to go to Tennessee later in the month. You're hoping, like you said, that your defensive ability there is able to keep you in those games. A guy that I wanted to touch on just a little bit. He had a quiet 14 points in this one, but you've been really high. You've tweeted about him a bunch. You've written about him a couple of times on Trey Donaldson. This season, and also since he's taken over the starting point guard job a few games ago, it seems like it was the smart move. Aiden Holloway is tremendously talented. You can see flashes in his game that he's got that potential, but we always kind of thought maybe he'd be a 2 or 3 year guy. I don't think many people thought he would come in with his size and be a one and done type player. But it doesn't always show up on the stat sheet. It doesn't always necessarily come off the page to you. But what Trey Donaldson does for this team to make them better, I guess, what have you kind of seen from him this season? Because the numbers don't lie. It was another example of it last night where he just does all the little things, and Auburn is a lot better when he's on the floor running the offense.
No, he's terrific. Yeah, he's absolutely terrific. And this Auburn backcourt, I think he was one of those forgotten guys. It's like, hey, what are we going to get from him? Like, everybody was focused on Denver Jones, and Aiden comes in, and you're going to get KD Johnson and see what he has there. But Trey just is so solid. And I'm looking at the numbers again today. Like, his ability to put pressure on the rim, he's different from the rest of Auburn's guards because he can get to the rim and finish at a high level. He's shooting 65% at the rim, 61% on that little runner, and he got to that a little bit yesterday. That off the bounce game, right? Like, he's shooting over 40% on off the dribble twos, knocking down his catch and shoot threes at over a 40% clip when he gets, like, what does he do wrong? Like, it's just a little bit of everything with this guy. And I love the pace that he plays with. I love how he still chases offensive rebounds, even though he's a smaller guy. And you might think, I got to get back on defense. Like, no, he'll go chase offensive rebounds. Like, he'll try to get a putback dunk or two if he can. And I feel like Auburn just feels more settled. They get the shots that they want when he's on the floor. And they're not rushed. They're in rhythm. And that's him. Like, that's him getting those guys in great position. Obviously, I have really, really good talent behind him. But I just feel like they feel so much more at ease when he's on the floor. And then defensively too, just not getting screened, fighting over picks, fighting underneath them, understanding the scouting report. Like, he is super locked in on that end as well. And that's really, really impressive. He has been as improved, I think, as arguably any player in the SEC this year. And he's one of my most improved players in the country. That's a story that'll come out probably next week, but he is so much better than what he was last year. And he's turned into a guy that, we thought, hey, is he like a career backup to? I mean, he looks like a legit SEC starting point guard right now.
I mean, it was several games ago. I think it was the second or third game in the SEC when Buzz Williams said, according to their own evaluations, their in-house stuff, whatever, sort of analytics they use, that Trey Donaldson was the most improved player in the SEC, regardless of position. That was, 6 or 7 games ago when he wasn't even starting. I wanted to touch on it just for a second because it was mentioned on the broadcast. Charles Barkley was talking about it. I saw a lot of, Alabama fans kind of latching onto it as well. The lack of size for Alabama and that front court presence that Auburn does have. I guess just when you look at the SEC at large, when you look at this is going to be maybe a 3, maybe 4 team race down the stretch here for the league title. How much, you talk about a steady presence. How much does that do for Auburn to have that sort of steady presence inside with those 2 guys? Because I don't think I can think of an example this season where it hasn't been either Broom or Jalen Williams. I mean, sometimes one of them will be off, but you're usually going to have the other one. And then when they combine for 50 points, there's really not many teams that are going to beat you when they do that.
Yeah, I feel like they have an identity. Like they know who they are, they know where their bread is buttered a little bit. And like you compare that to Tennessee, where it's like I feel like they're starting to figure out what their identity is too. But Alabama is still a little bit up in the air about that. Florida is like a agent of mass chaos, right? Like they're their own biggest enemy. It feels like at times. Kentucky still certainly trying to figure themselves out a lot of the ways. Even Mississippi State, I think, is a talented group, especially at home. But they're still working through things, especially with all of the injuries that they've had. And it just feels like when you have when you know your identity, when you know your rotation, where you know where you're getting your shots on the floor, like Auburn knows where they're getting most of their looks. That's where it's exciting. And I think this group can even get better. Like the front court play has been nice. And I know I looked at, again, this morning as I'm prepping for this, Auburn's top 50 in transition points per game, which is great. But they're only shooting 25% on threes in transition. Like that seems, if I'm an Auburn fan, I'm going, hey, we could have a little bit of positive regression there where shots start going in. They're wide open looks. And went and watched them. Like you're getting a lot of great looks. Auburn got great looks in transition from three yesterday against Alabama. And like when you're able to add that transition punch to also, hey, like when we get nitty gritty in the half court and we're just going to drill you with Janai Broome and Jalen Williams, that's just a matchup nightmare, I think. And when you could beat teams in these different ways, that's where I feel like Auburn's like this isn't fake. This isn't just, oh, we crushed teams by 40 and that's why we're number 4 on KenPom right now. Like this is real. Like this is a real team and it's really coming together. Yes, I understand they don't have like those elite wins that some necessarily want right now, but those opportunities will come. But like what they do on the floor, the challenges that they present both in the half court and in transition and on defense, that's real. That feels like it's a real thing. And it feels like those big men is really the epicenter of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce said in the offseason this had a chance to be a much improved three-point shooting team. And you've seen that at times this season. But I agree with you. You know, they're exactly 33.3% on the season. I think they can be a little bit better at that. And they've had some games where, you know, like you said, when they're able to go inside so consistently, they don't rely on the three ball. So that's a nice, you know, kind of notch in their belt. But at the same time, you feel like it's, you know, their time is coming where maybe they're going to have a barrage of threes or get a little bit more efficient there. I agree with you. There are a lot of elements where this team could get better.
Yeah. And like, even with Aiden Holloway, like he's a big time shooter and some of the jury is out on him a little bit, I think, on how to guard him in ball screens. I think you're seeing a lot more tems blitz him, not play drop coverage. Like Indiana played drop coverage against him in that one game. That was like one of the
and it was oddest, absurd to watch. Yeah.
I was like, why? Like, do we know? Have we watched the tape on this? It just doesn't make any sense. But I do think that like his percentage could also go up if he takes better ones. I think sometimes he wants to put his imprint on this team so badly. How does he do that? It's by making threes. And so sometimes I think he's taken a couple rush ones. Like their percentages could go up just with the right shot selection too at times as well. And also in transition as well. So I do think like this group takes enough threes. You know, I think, what are they, like top 150, I think, nationally in the number of threes they take per attempts. So they take enough, right? When you're getting as much rim pressure, when you're able to get as enough free throws that they have, they're taking enough threes. They're not going to lose the 3-point battle egregiously every game, and they can make up for it in every other area. But I do think the Aiden Holloway heater's coming, right? Like you're going to have another heater coming here where he can win you a game. And that's the thing too, in March, he can win you a game in March. And that's like that's the fun part about it. When you're trying to envision, hey, like how does Auburn win 6 different games? Maybe one of those games is the Aiden Holloway game. And not everybody has a guard like that coming off their bench, let alone the SEC and also nationally.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. You know, we kind of, every game we'll kind of look and be like, you know, is this the one where Holloway just scores 22? You know, even coming off the bench, you know, he plays plenty. He's got that talent level, but, you know, he is struggling a little bit relative to their expectations. I mean, he was a all-world type shooter coming out of high school, able to make pretty much anything. And so, but, you know, it's a freshman game coming into the SEC. It's a big physical league where, I mean, we see that sometimes where teams learn over the course of the season. And you're right. I mean, earlier in the season, we would just say aloud to ourselves while watching the games, like, why would you go under that screen? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Now, obviously, they're not doing that as much. Teams are pressing up on him because obviously that's going to bother him. But, you know, if that's Auburn's biggest problem at the moment, of course, they're in a pretty decent spot. What do you make right now of the SEC Player of the Year race? Because it seems, at least to me, who's not in it super deep, Dalton Knecht is maybe the guy to beat. But shoot, I mean, if Broome keeps doing this, even if it's just every other game, he's certainly going to be in the conversation at the end.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm open-ended. I have no favorite right now. I'm completely just wait and see at this point, because Janai's been phenomenal, and Dalton Connect's been phenomenal, and Mark Sears is like a free throw merchant somehow. He's like a 6-foot guard who could somehow get 14 attempts at the line, and I don't understand how he gets away with it. Wade Taylor, another same way. Like, we know he's super combustible as well. So I think if my vote today, it would probably be Connect. But if Auburn wins the league, Janai Broom's the most valuable player. Like, it's way too close. Like, there's not some huge separation here. I know like other people nationally have talked about, oh, this is Dalton Connect's award to lose. I think it's a way closer race than what people are saying. Like, Broom's up to second now nationally in Ken Palm's Player of the Year race. Like, that's nuts. Like, that's crazy with how improved he's been and how dominant he's been. And I do think some of the minutes that he plays also impacts his stat line. Like, he only plays what, like 26 minutes sometimes.
It's definitely less than, it's like 27, 28, something like that maybe.
Yeah, so Ken Palm has him playing 60% of the minutes so far this year. Dalton Connect's at 74%. So like some of the counting stats are going to be a little bit tilted, and just because of the rotation and how Auburn's game plan is with trying to get Dylan Cardwell in the game and play deep and play 10 different guys. But both of those guys feel like it feels like separation season for both those guys. And obviously the SEC race will have a big part of it. Because I think if Tennessee wins the league, Connect's probably the choice. And if Auburn wins the league, Broom's probably the choice. And if Alabama wins the league, I'm probably still going to vote for Broom or Connect, to be honest.
Yeah, so much. You mentioned like how much the metrics love Broom. I mean, he's been high up in those all season, even when he wasn't putting together, monstrous performances like these. I think a big part of it is like it's rare in college basketball, and Auburn fans are so used to it because they've seen it. Even last year, Broom was pretty good. Of course, Walker Kessler, like it was automatic that he was going to get you, 17 and 12 every game. Janai Broom rolls out of bed and gets 12 and 7. It's just, what he does on top of that. That level of consistency, like that doesn't happen everywhere. Not every team has that with their 5-man. And so I think that's a big part of why the numbers love him so much. It's every single game. He really has only had a couple games all year where he's been anything beneath that. And now you've had, I think it's 4.6 blocks and 19 points and 9 boards over his last 5 games or something like that. And, it's their heat pump. I mean, if they're going to be able to make a run here for an SEC title, they've got to know that they can rely on him. And so far that's been the case.
No doubt. And I think it's the other aspects too of his game that have really impressed me. Just like the playmaking with him has gotten a lot better. His vision on the floor is just so much better than what it used to be. I think he's up to an 18% assist rate so far this year, which is almost double what it was last year.
He almost had a triple-double against Ole Miss with assists.
Right. And he could even have more if Auburn starts shooting it better. He has a lot of potential assists that aren't necessarily coming to fruition too. And then like his on-off splits, like they're an awesome rim protecting team when he's on the floor. Teams are shooting like under 50% when he's on the floor. Like he's a dog. Like he is a dog. And I love it, the nasty that he has this year. Like just the nasty edge that he plays with feels like that just perforates through the entire team. And that, when you have an alpha dog like that just kind of changes the complexion of this group. And we talk about like Trey Donaldson, most improved player of the year. Janai Broom has a case for most improved player in the SEC, which is saying something because he was pretty darn good last year.
Yeah, I mean, second team all SEC guy last season when he came over from Moorhead. I mean, we were talking about this before we got rolling. Just certain aspects of his game that don't necessarily show up in the stat sheet, I feel like have gotten better. I don't feel like he's still much more of a finesse guy. He's got those great moves. We saw that all last night. I mean, he's got great moves with his back to the basket, which is kind of a rare skill these days. But against, more physical big guys last year, you sort of saw that be an Achilles heel for him. I mean, he shut down Tolu Smith this season. Alabama is not the example you want to make in terms of going against a physical front line. He's going to have, Tyree Samuel for Florida is going to be a great example of that this weekend. But he's improved on that as well. I feel like he is a more physical, sort of fleshed out player in his second year in the league. The free throw shooting is, and we'll stop gushing about Janai Broom here in a minute, but the free throw shooting is one thing. I mean, we were in the locker room in Birmingham. They lose the NCAA tournament. He gets asked about, because I think he went 6 of 16 in that game against Houston. He was a 56% shooter last year. Gets asked one more question about free throws, and that was the end of it for him. He slammed his hand into a locker and put a towel over his head, and that was it. He wasn't talking to anybody else. And so to kind of remember that image of him, and now he's like 85% in SEC play, 9 of 11 at the line. I mean, a 2-for-2 trip last year Auburn fans are like, "Oof." Like, wow, that's great for Janai. Wow, he got a 2 for 2. And now he just goes out there and he hits 80+% and he does it like it's nothing. I mean, that's something that, and this entire team has gotten better at the line and shoot program record 40 free throws in this game. I'm not sure they would have done that last season.
Yeah, my high school coach always would say, like, 2 missed free throws are a turnover. Like, and we would just talk about it like that. And so 1 out of 2 last year felt like a win sometimes, right? 1 point per possession. Hey, we'll take it. Now it's like when you just put this much pressure on teams and you're constantly fouling teams out. Like, I know Zach Edey's the main comp for, hey, he fouls out 2-3 guys every single game. But Auburn's front line has a similar impact where you're just gonna rack up fouls. Like, you better be ready. Your third big man better be ready because he's probably playing against Auburn, and that's the Janai Broome factor too.
Yeah, and I think before this game, when Bruce Pearl was talking about Nick Pringle being back for Alabama, I think some Auburn fans are like, when he hasn't really done that much, it's just having that extra guy, and you saw that a little bit. He was able to give Janai a run for his money a couple times, but of course Alabama's just not. I mean, Grant Nelson has done a lot of great things this season for them. But in terms of a defender under the rim against a guy like Broome, against a guy like Williams, it just didn't work for them. And I mean, I was in there with Nate Oates after the game, and I think he's got a legitimate concern about whether that is an Achilles heel for this team in March. I mean, Auburn, as of right now, isn't going to match up with them again. They could in the SEC tournament and beyond. But I'm interested to see now because I'm interested to watch Alabama along with we'll get into the rest of the SEC title race. These teams at the top, Auburn fans are going to have to pay close attention to them because it's going to be a pretty tight race here.
No doubt. And, that's the thing I was been worried about with Alabama all year. The thing was Charles Bediako leaving just didn't make any sense. It made no sense. He didn't get drafted. I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong there. I don't believe he got drafted.
He did. Yeah.
Right. And so it was like that was like the piece that they really definitely needed, and they weren't able to really go out into the portal and change that. And so, you kind of look at you look at some of the teams near the top of the league. Like if Alabama wants to win the title, you kind of have to go through Purdue. Well, that's a really bad matchup. Oh, you got to go through UConn. Oh, that's a really bad matchup because Donovan Clingan. Hopefully they don't see Auburn again, right? Because Janai Broome's a really bad matchup. You probably don't want to get the UNC draw because that's a really bad matchup. Like you probably don't want to see Kansas because that's another really bad matchup with Hunter Dickinson. Like Duke would be a tough matchup with Kyle Filipowski. So it's like that's where I just don't see it as Alabama as like they're going to win 6 in a row. I just don't like that. They maybe feel like a team that I could see them getting hot, like a Miami maybe last year and making a run to the Elite Eight, but I just don't think they have enough. And that one Achilles heel, I think, will cost them. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, so now we've got 8 games left in the league for most teams. Guys like Tennessee, there's a couple other teams that have had their bye week. That's all going to, of course, sort of even out over the next few weeks. It is now Auburn, South Carolina, Alabama tied at the top at 8-2. If you try to do the tiebreaker stuff right now you go down and it's like who they play at the top and you go down 1 through 14. Don't do that to yourself at this point. Don't go through that headache. Like that'll all work itself out. But South Carolina is the one that's been the huge surprise. I don't really know anybody who is not a believer at this point. I don't know how you can't be. With them beating Tennessee, with them beating Kentucky earlier in the year, and then even games they should win now when they're back on their home floor, when they're on the road. I mean, they're just winning these kinds of games. That is one where that was not highlighted on the schedule when you looked at Auburn early in the year, but now that's a Valentine's Day game next week. Auburn is like, woof, like they're really glad they have that on their home floor now because that's a week later. This one against Alabama was really big for the title race. A week later, you could have a very similar thing against Carolina.
No question. Yeah, it's like one of those things. That's why I'm trying to steer away from like preseason strength of schedule ratings for like conference play because we get this wrong all the time. Like South Carolina dead last in the preseason poll, and now that game is actually something worth monitoring. So early in the year, you'd probably be like, well, Auburn has a nice little home schedule here. Not so much anymore. But if Auburn wins the SEC title, they're going to earn it. Like they have one of the toughest strength of schedules left of any of these SEC contenders. Right, Florida on the road is tough. South Carolina, obviously at home. And South Carolina, that's a clash of two teams that do things differently, right? Like South Carolina is an elite transition defense. Like we've talked about earlier, or Auburn's a really good transition offense. So that's for me the big thing. Like, are you able to turn over those South Carolina guards, and then can you take advantage in transition and kind of get them before their defense gets set? Because they're nasty in the half court. I think Lamont Paris has done a phenomenal job. You know, it speaks to getting old, right? The ability to go into the portal and get old with transfers that, you know, those guys didn't necessarily win at their previous stops, but they bought in on winning. They don't make a lot of mistakes. And that type of basketball is pretty different than some of the other teams in the SEC. Like they slow it down a little bit. I call it buckyball. Like it's got a lot of Wisconsin in them because Lamont Paris is a former Wisconsin assistant, and they were really good at taking away transition defense. So it's like, it's a little different. It looks a little different, but it works. Now, I don't know if they have, like, they don't strike me as a team that can run away from anyone. Like they've had some nights where they make a ton of shots, but for the most part, I don't think that's a team that's going to punk you by 20. They don't have like that hammer that Auburn has. And so that leads to a lot of close games. So I wouldn't be surprised if South Carolina starts to lose some of these closer games down the stretch. It's going to be tough. Their schedule isn't easy either, but that's still a team that's obviously exceeded expectations. So I'd be surprised if they won the league, but I mean, I guess nothing should surprise me anymore at this group.
Yeah, they remind me a little bit. And Lamont Paris is a very different coach in terms of getting to the SEC than when Bruce Pearl came to Auburn. They remind me of that Auburn team in 17-18. They were picked to go 4-14 in the league. I think that was 12th in the league. They end up sharing the SEC title with Tennessee that season. And so, yeah, I mean, even if they don't win it outright, of course, Carolina's got a great opportunity here to be in it at the end. Looking at Auburn's schedule, Carolina and Kentucky at home in back-to-back games. You have an opportunity here, depending on how the AP poll continues to shake out. Not that matters at any point this season. These are quad one games. That's what we're paying attention to. But 3 straight top 20 matchups at home. If you're talking about South Carolina and Kentucky, you know, Bruce Pearl mentions it all the time. He tries to, I guess, shake a little bit of realism into this Auburn fan base because basketball is very new to them, and they'll be the first to admit it. You know, they kind of freaked out a little bit, or some people freaked out when they lost 2 in a row on the road. They were both quad one games. He kind of had to bring everybody back down to earth and say, hey, like, it's going to happen. You know, they're going to lose on the road, probably going to lose on the road multiple more times this season. He knows that, going into Florida. I think Auburn is 1 for their last 20 in Gainesville. Haven't won there since 1996. So he's like, yeah, this kind of thing is really difficult. But, you know, we talk a lot about Auburn's home floor, and it's, you know, gained national attention for being a good environment. You look at these games like Carolina, Kentucky, even winning ones like you should against Georgia. This is now where push comes to shove. And you did it last night against Alabama, where it's like, hey, if you have an elite home court and you want to claim that, you've got to go out there and you've got to win every home game if you're going to have an opportunity to win the SEC.
No doubt. So let's do some math, right? So you have 4 home games left: South Carolina, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Georgia. I think they're going to be favored in all 4 of those games. They probably should win all 4 of those games. So that puts you at 12. And then you're looking at the road, like you have 4 games left on the road. Do you need to win half of those to win the league, I think, right?
One of them is Missouri. Yeah.
Right. One of them is Missouri. So it's Tennessee, it's Georgia, and it's Florida. Like, you don't want to say like this is like the turning point for the league because there's so much left here. But if you could go on the road to Florida, a place that's tough to play at, but isn't impossible, right? We've seen some road teams go into Florida this year and beat them. And like I said earlier, that's a agent of chaos team, right? Where they're anything's on the table when Florida plays. Literally anything. Like you could see the dumbest basketball of your life. You could see the best basketball of your life for 8 minutes. Like everything is on the table when Florida plays. And it's going to be a war. It is absolutely going to be a war on the glass. And Florida matches up pretty well with them, I would say. Like they like to play 2 bigs, right? Tyrese Samuel is a big part of that, but Micah Handlockton and Alex Condon are 2 bigs that they like to have on the floor as well. So they're not going to be intimidated by Auburn's size. For me, it's all about the backcourt. Like Auburn's guards have to keep Walter Clayton under wraps. And if you can force Riley Kugel to play iso ball and say, hey, Riley, if you want to go like take 18, 19 shots, that's probably a win for Auburn. So if you're able to turn them over and get into transition and play Auburn's game, that could be a huge advantage. But I think Florida is a really, really dangerous team. They're really talented too. It feels like they're just like a couple possessions away from being a lot better than what their record says they are, and they're 15-7.
Yeah, I mean nobody respects Todd Golden, and the Gators more than Bruce. I mean, Todd was here for a few years. He's a former Auburn assistant. He and Stephen Pearl are like that. And so it's funny. We had Stephen on our podcast last year, and he said after I think it was the second SC game of the year, they played Florida, didn't have them on the schedule the rest of the year. Stephen said he and Todd would call and exchange notes on teams like before games. And I asked him if that was a common practice, and he was like, yeah, like it's not really that big of a deal. Like, but when you get to Nashville and it's like tournament time, you kind of put the phone away for a little bit, because you never know, like on a Thursday and at Bridgestone Arena, you might go up against them. And so you kind of want to leave that communication off. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting how this schedule is going to play out. I'm with you that it is really tough. Auburn's going to have to earn it. At the same time, there are some stretches where you're kind of looking and saying Auburn should, air quotes around should, make a run here, go 3-0 during a certain stretch. There's really no question at this point, and it's kind of mind-boggling the point the program has gotten to, where you're, February 8th, and you're like, okay, well, there's no doubt this is a tournament team, which they couldn't say that last year, so it's kind of interesting. It was my first time really covering, not a bubble team, but like they were right there on the cusp, and you felt like, I mean, they had to win that game against Tennessee at the end of the regular season. This just doesn't feel that way for Auburn. This legitimately, barring some sort of collapse here, which of course could always happen, barring that, it really seems like Auburn is now in a position where they're trying to win the SEC, and they're playing to get a good seed in the tournament. They don't want to be a 4 or 5. They'd rather be a 2 or a 3. I am looking here, that game against Tennessee this is one of the later times that they've played Tennessee on the road. They played them there last year late on the road, but there was that team didn't have much of an opportunity there because they were not great on offense. February 28th at Tennessee. I think that could be one of the games in the SEC this season in terms of Auburn having an opportunity to win it. But it's interesting, you look after that, Auburn's 3 games to close the year: Mississippi State at home, the worst team in the league on the road, and Georgia at home. So it's like you could theoretically falter a couple times, maybe even against teams you shouldn't, and then you could go 3-0 at the end against some relatively easy opponents, and you could win the league.
And no question. But like those big games too are just so valuable for Auburn's seed line, right? Just because the predictive metrics, right? Like KenPom, Bart Torvik. I mean, I checked today, Bart Torvik. Auburn's up to 3rd in the country in Bart Torvik. Like, so predictive metrics really like this team and are telling you, hey, this is an awesome team. But their strength of schedule, their quality wins, like they need to rack those up a little bit more to start to really get yourself in position for a higher seed. So that game on the road at Tennessee could be for a seed line or two, because you say that Auburn doesn't want a 4 or 5 seed. No number 1 seed wants to be like, oh, wait, who's our 4? Like, we got Auburn as our 4 seed, and they're 4th on KenPom, and we're Purdue, and we're number 1 on you know what I mean, or whatever. Like, no, there's a lot of 1 seeds that are praying to God that Auburn isn't that 4 or 5 seed, right? Like they want nothing to do with that. But like Tennessee is a spot where you could potentially get, that's another quad 1 win. Kentucky could be a quad 1. South Carolina could potentially be a quad 1. Florida on the road, quad 1. Like, you start to stack those quad 1s. That's where you get to that 2-3 seed. Because I think you really want to be at the bottom of the bracket in March. I don't think you want to be in that 4 seed, 5 seed range. I would much rather have a 2 or a 3 seed, like especially in this bracket, especially this year. And I think if you're in the bottom half of a bracket, that's kind of where you can go on a run a little bit easier, in my opinion, just because I feel like, some of the teams at the top, I think, are starting to separate a little bit. And in the middle, there's a little bit more closeness where you can start to maybe see some upsets too, even where you can get a little bit more of a favorable path. And that feels like those road games there are going to pretty much determine whether Auburn's a 3 seed or whether there's a 5 seed and we have a one seed, just so mad on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, no one's ever going to be able to say that Auburn didn't have an opportunity here to improve its seeding. Going back to Ole Miss, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight quad 1 games for them. That'll finish up against Tennessee there on the road. And so we were talking about it on our message board, like any sort of positivity there. 4 and 3, and they're in a position maybe do 5 and 2 in those kinds of games. That 7-game stretch, but even a 4 and 3, like that's just going to do so much for your resume, especially because you didn't have those previously. I mean, they went the entire season without a quad 1 win until they won at Ole Miss. Before I get you out of here, let's talk a little bit about we've talked about the tournament a couple times. It's when you get to February, we're all really kind of itching for March Madness. I think Auburn has the blueprint now that a lot of people like. You've seen them thrown into Final Four conversations. Who's your trendy pick to make the make the Final Four. I think Auburn, fans have kind of realized that it's not a crapshoot in the tournament, but it is just kind of whoever gets hot, and they are the perfect example of that. A few years ago, I think they were 10-8 in the league, and they made a run to the Final Four just because they were playing well at the right time. But the reason you see Auburn there at the top with some of these other teams is because of everything we talked about, their consistency on both ends of the floor, their ability to have an identity, their ability to take care of the basketball, play good defense. And then when they win, they go out and win by a lot. Usually they're handling teams. And of course, metrics are going to like that a lot. Who are the other teams? Who are your kind of no-brainers at this point where you're saying, all right, if you're going to have a conversation about teams that are going to be in it in the end and, teams that are going to be a very popular, highlight in the bracket selection process, who are you kind of looking at right now?
Yeah, for me, Purdue and UConn feel like the top two teams that are starting to separate a little bit. UConn, really connected group. All their pieces play. A lot of pros, right? Like they probably have 3 guys that are pros and then 2 all-conference guards. So that's helpful. Purdue, obviously, is, everyone talks about Zach Edey, but I think their supporting cast is way better this year than people think. So those are the 2. The other one for me is I keep going back to Tennessee. Tennessee and Auburn were 2 of my flag post teams early in the season where I'm like, those teams are good. Like I thought Tennessee was hands down, no doubt, the best team in the league. And then I thought that Auburn was like a team that was going to outplay their expectations. And so those are the group, that Tennessee team feels like they have a lot more answers to the test than they did in the past. And it's more than Dalton Connect. I really do think they have a lot more answers with Jonas Adu starting to find himself a little bit as a scorer, with Zakai Ziegler playing a little bit more consistently. They can win with defense. They can win with offense. I like that. So that's another team. Arizona is super inconsistent. The metrics continue to love them, but they're really iffy on the road at times. And sometimes they'll give up a lot of threes. Those are the teams that I continue to like. I think I'm selling a little bit on North Carolina. That's one of the teams that I continue to be a little bit hesitant on. We talk a lot about, top 10 on defense, top 10 on offense, all those things on KenPom. Like those things, I don't know how much they matter that much, but North Carolina's 8th in defense, but that's because teams just don't make threes against them. Lately, teams are making threes. Now they're starting to lose games. I think it was a little bit lucky-ish, so to speak there. So those are the teams that I'm buying and selling a little bit. And Auburn's one of those teams that I continue to just look at this roster and look at how they're built and look at what they bring to the table every day. And I don't understand why they can't make a run. Like they have a little bit of everything. I guess maybe you're a little bit concerned about their half court offense at times, or do you have guards that can get to the rim and finish at times? But those are just kind of minuscule. Those are minor things when you're comparing it to other teams around them, like Alabama, where it's like, hey, like just hope we don't run into a 7-foot, 240-pound center, or probably getting trucked that day. Like it's a first world problem compared to some of the other teams in the country.
Yeah, and Auburn didn't know that it was going to have this kind of consistency on defense. I think they were kind of underrated defensively last year by a lot of people. Alan Flanagan and Zep Jasper were 2 of the better on-ball defenders in the SEC, and Bruce Pearl voiced his concerns about that over and over again in the offense. He's like, I think we can shoot the ball. Look at these 2 big guys. Like, we're going to be able to score, but he's like, I got to get these guys to want to play defense. The Denver Jones thing, not to get off on a tangent, but I don't know if you've kind of kept up with what he's been doing defensively. 20 points per game scorer in Conference USA. Comes here, realizes he's not going to get the same amount of shots. He's not going to be a 20-point per game scorer. He's been a little bit better recently, but has turned into a just absolute nightmare. I think Mark Sears didn't have a basket against him until like 8 minutes left in the game. So they just put, we talked about that Florida matchup. They're going to do the same thing. They just put him against the other team's best guard. That was such a luxury when they had Zep Jasper. It's just a luxury to have a 2 guard that you can just say, hey, go get that guy. And so, that is, you're talking about teams that people like. Auburn's defense, I think, is a really big reason why. And they didn't know they were going to have that this season. I think they thought, like we mentioned, they thought they were going to shoot even better than they are right now. They thought they were going to have 2 big guys. But that is something that as you get on the road, as you move into March, you're hoping your defense is going to carry you there. And Auburn's had that so far.
Yeah, it's so funny you bring up Denver Jones, because I did this story in the offseason where I talked to rival coaches who played against them, and like just for scouts, and like everybody who played against Denver Jones was like, bucket, like he's going to be the next great Auburn guard, like he's 100% can score 18 a game. And so like to see him do this with defense is really cool. Like he's kind of built himself into something that's different, and it's a great point. Like having that is a luxury. And then I also look at the deflections too. Like they can get so many deflections with their length and their speed and their activity. They're just like hyenas. They just are flying everywhere, all over the floor. And then you add in elite rim defense, maybe the best rim defense in the country. That's a really, really good recipe. I just feel like it's a pain in the butt to score against Auburn every night. And you kind of need some outlier shooting performances because you're not going to get anything easy at the rim. You kind of have to hope that the whistles are being blown where you can get a bunch of free throws and that your threes are falling, or you're probably not scoring. Like that's just how it is.
Well, in the transfer evaluation stuff, I think some people I don't think realize, looking outside of Auburn, outside of the SEC, you look at Janai Broom, even Zep Jasper was a fantastic fit for this team. Walker Kessler, like that obviously worked out. But the transfer evaluation stuff, like that doesn't come easy to everybody. Not everybody is going to have somebody that fits so well. We've gone this entire show haven't talked about Chad Baker-Mazara, who he gets you 13 every other game, and he's a menace defense. He's just taller, KD Johnson. Like he has the same screws loose in his head. I don't know if you saw it was. We predicted this would happen. They were like, yeah, Chad gave a big halftime speech against Ole Miss. And he's apparently like teaching the team to trash talk in Spanish because he's from the Dominican Republic. And we were like, I bet halfway through the speech, he forgot and he just started speaking Spanish and they just went along with it. And he said that's what happened. He said midway through, he started just speaking Spanish to him. And they were like, Chad, English, like you lost us there for a minute. But I mean, you talk about the pieces and the depth that this team has. 40 minutes into the show, we don't mention get their fourth or fifth scorer on the team, and that's a guy who you and I talked about it over the summer. I remember when Tyron Lawrence was flirting with Auburn. We thought that was a big loss. We thought he had an opportunity to be a really, really good scoring pair there at that 3 spot, and I was kind of wondering what they were going to do at the 3. I just Chris Moore's not going to get you a lot. He is going to be a menace defensively and a really good hustle player. He's not going to score as your starter at the 3. But I think, the evaluation or the development, whatever it is that has gotten Baker-Mazara to this point that you don't have a liability at that 3 spot right now. And he's a guy that can do a lot for you. I think that's been really big for them because Tyron Lawrence felt like a big loss at the time. And now you got a guy in Baker-Mazara who's doing a ton for you on both ends of the floor.
No question. Now, part one makes me wonder, hey, did Tyron Lawrence make a mistake, right? Would he want that decision back? Maybe. But Chad Baker-Mazara, like you talked about, he's awesome. And the other thing, too, is, the transfer portal cycle, it opens in 5 weeks, right? The day after Selection Sunday. Coaches in the tournament are going to be recruiting in the portal. And we would be dumb for Auburn not to go, hey, look at our starting lineup is transfer big man, a transfer wing. Like we have a cell here in the portal that is only better. Like it's only going to get better. And what are those needs? Like we think this group's going to have a lot of guards back next year, but they're probably going to have to go in the portal and recruit another big time big man. Maybe they need another wing, right? Who knows? They have a cell now that's really, really good, as good as anybody in the country. And that really plays. And so Denver Jones coming in and finding a way to make an impact, even if he's not scoring. Chad Baker-Mazara coming in and playing some of his best basketball of his life. Janai Broom turning into an All-American / SEC Player of the Year contender. All of that's going to pay off in 5 weeks when the portal opens.
Well, and Broom has another year that he could do, but he was so close to going to the draft last year. His parents told me that a couple teams that had like the 56th and 52nd picks called him and said, we're really considering you. Feels like he's gonna go after this year. And that is that's a void they haven't had in a long time, where it's like, because they didn't get Flory Badunga in the recruiting process. And so it's like, that's just massive. You're just gonna call up the best big guy. You're gonna call up all the best big guys and just say, all right, first was Kessler, then was Broom, potentially 2 All-Americans. Like, do you want to be the next one? We were talking about that before we got rolling. I'll let you out of here in just a second. I know we've been going a long time, but I know that's something you're kind of thinking about as we get closer to Selection Sunday. You got to keep in the back of your mind what teams are going to be doing in the portal. Auburn is going to be, I would think they'll be in it for the best centers in the country that are in the portal. I would think so.
No question. And the cell is really good too when you also factor in you have all of these role players that have a chance to come back. If you crush it in retention, it's like plug and play, almost like, hey, we got a really great team here. You're just kind of the missing link. We're going to go do what we just did again this year. Like that's where it's like, you're not coming into like some team that like has a lot of pieces that you got to fill. And you're just like the first part of the puzzle here. Like you're kind of the last piece, not the first piece. I think that helps a little bit too in the portal as well. When you're trying to sell kids in a very short period of time, what's my role? What are expectations? What am I going to do? Like that it's easy. It's a lot easier now when you have all of the other pieces in place.
Isaac, thank you so much for hopping on today. I've really enjoyed chopping it up on Auburn hoops and the SEC and everything else with you. I know our listeners enjoyed it as well. So yeah, thanks so much, and I look forward to keeping up and chatting with you as we get closer to March. I was going to ask you, just real quickly before we get out of here, who are kind of your sleeper teams that you think could make a run in March. We don't have to spend a whole answer on it because we've been going for a long time, but that is something I was kind of wondering.
Sleeper teams, let them off the top of my head. Colorado State, they got a stud point guard, Isaiah Stevens. That's a beast of a team. They run great actions. New Mexico, I'm not trying to bog this down with Mountain West stuff, but they got great guards. They're really athletic. They're super fast. They're super fun. If Colorado gets in the tournament, I think that's a team that could make a run. And I keep going back to it. Florida, that roster's really, really talented, top to bottom. So if Florida, Wake Forest, those are two teams that, if they sneak into the tournament, they load up with transfers, the right transfers, probably going to be pretty darn good. So I wouldn't be surprised if Florida's in that second weekend somehow, even if they sneak into the tournament the last second.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, it's going to be another 8 or 9 bid year for the SEC, and of course Auburn hopes that it's right there at the top as they get closer to March. And so Isaac, thanks so much again for hopping on. You guys go follow him on Twitter at Isaac2_ Trotter, and you can read all his stuff at 24/7. We appreciate everybody for listening to the show today. Go leave us a 5-star review if you guys liked it. The bumper music is by Beats by Mordecai. You can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. Until the next episode, we'll catch you guys later. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week. Talk to y'all soon.